time they take it off, maybe then we would want to sell some of it. I think we have to look at that more. But the point that, if you use gross numbers of $10 million or whatever, I think the reality, forestry is a low margin business. Your bottom line net is not going to be as profitable, generally speaking. We have other ones, grocery stores operate on a very small margin. I think forestry, and especially if you look recently with the volatility in popple and such, it's been really low, and the pressure on state lands, it hasn't been a great return. But I think we need to continue to push them. I think that the future lies that we have to think about maybe some of it shouldn't be forestry. Some of it needs to be sold off. Some of it should be managed differently. Maybe some of it, if it's not going to be good forestry, maybe it should be exchanged as WMAs. And the school trusts be compensated to sell the land, and it becomes a wildlife management area or whatever it is. So in that respect, I think we do need to push them to do the best we can on this land. But I would encourage you to look, and I've been a critic of the DNR and some of what they're doing, and hopefully forestry will continue to move more to using technology. But there are instances where some of this individually marketing and labor intensive makes sense, because for instance, this spot of red pine, it was the right thing to do because it was important to look at each tree to maximize. Taking out a third of the wood, I think, is how to leave it to maximize the future, and I think it did make sense in that case. So I think they're trying, and we together all need to push them farther, because like many folks that are my age, change does not come easy, and there's change needed in this area. I think we as people that can influence that decision about change, and some of it shouldn't be managed for forestry anymore. We need to make some changes, because the reality, forestry is a low margin, you're not going to get $100 popple normally. It's going to be $26 or $38 or whatever, and that's not a lot of money when you think of how long it takes. And so I've rambled on a little bit, but I just believe, Representative Dietrich, you're on the right track to push them. We need to push them. There's a lot of the agencies here need, and we have special obligation here because of the fiduciary responsibility, but there are examples of where local foresters are working their tail off and doing the best they can in an industry and a business that's hard pressed to make good money.
Representative Dietrich. I just have to make a comment, and that is that I would never, and I hope nobody ever heard me say that I don't think everything they're doing is wrong. All I'm saying is, do we have the right model in place to make sure that we are taking care of our first obligation on those lands first, and that is the trust obligations. That is a higher level obligation than anything else, and we can say we need to push harder. Well, I've been pushing for 5 years and getting more out, and and so if we are just going to, and so then what I have noticed is that everybody else then, especially the legislature, has all different ideas on what we ought to push harder on. One person says we ought to sell more. One person says we ought to be trading more. One person says trade more, but not in my backyard. Another person is, there's, for every legislator, there's a different scenario on what we ought to be doing on that land. And so that is where things get mixed up as to what our real obligation is. And so I will always contend that the school children of this state at least deserves their own trustee, so that they can be making those decisions. And I don't understand why the resistance of our own trustee making those same decisions and maybe hiring the DNR to go out on that land and do that same work. But at least we can account for it instead of just a blanket FTEs and just trusting that these are all valid expenses, especially when we have the type of information we have now. And this information has not even always been available. So, you know, I just have to say, once again, I appreciate the defense, and I'm not saying that they're doing it wrong. All I'm saying is that I don't think we're meeting our trust obligations.
Senator Rowland. Thank you, Madam Chair, and Representative Dietrich, thank you. And thank you for all the work you've done delving into this. I have not personally had the time to do what you have done, and I appreciate your efforts. You know, there's a difficulty in our economic climate right now. It might sound like we should sell land. It's almost impossible to do so. And one of the reasons I really believe that's so is because we hold so much public land that there's no incentive for people to buy anymore. We have public hunting lands all over, so they're really, you know, nobody has to go out and spend the money themselves because the state or the federal government or somebody has already done that, and there's a lot available. So therefore, we have to manage what we have, and we have to manage it well, because you know, selling it from one public entity to another doesn't make a lot of sense to me either. So I applaud your efforts to want to get a different management model. I think that we need to look at that, and I don't know what it is, but I think that managing it well is right now, in this current economic climate at least, our only possibility. You know, even the companies that have large tracts of forest land they've been wanting to sell them off too. And in fact, we bought some of it for our state park. And you know, it's just something that we're going to have to manage what we have. And I don't think wood products are going to go out of style, although certainly the printing companies are hurting, and they're not using paper like they used to, and it's reflected all over the place. I mean, even our postal system will tell us that people just aren't they're not using paper like they used to. Things are all electronic. So, but there is still a need and a demand for wood products, and I think that will continue, although it's decreased. But we'll have to figure out where the demand is and what kind of wood they need, and manage it accordingly.
Any other comments? Thank you very much. Now to the groundwater sale and exchange.
Yeah, I don't think that would, I don't think the trustee.
You are. I think by law you are.
I mean, an update on the status of the work group primarily. I've given some updates in the past on over the past few months on where that group's been and where that group's been going. Just as a reminder, the work group was a group that was commissioned from the DWCA Sale and Exchange subcommittee of the Permanent School Fund Advisory Committee. And what that work group was tasked with was kind of building some momentum for the U.S. Forest Service and the DNR to work together to select candidate parcels that could be part of the exchange and sale to remove the school trust land from the boundary waters. And that was not only the connection, but the consultation of the meetings to the U.S. Forest Service as well as the DNR. The group first met in 2010, and that was the beginning stages, just some discussion and talking about the selection of the land. From there, the Forest Service and the DNR began work on selecting the parcels. We reviewed over 100,000 parcels for the exchange in early 2011. Those parcels were agreed upon as candidates for the exchange between the U.S. Forest Service and the DNR. At that point, the work group was brought back together in May to discuss, to present the parcels and get the comments from the work group members. The reminder, the work group members was made up of a number of people from this committee: Bob Kratz, Ron Nardine, Grace Kelleher, and then there's also other stakeholders, Betsy Dobb to represent the environmental interests, Frank Ongaro from mining interests, and then Branford's timber interests. I think that's it. Group met in May. We looked at the parcels. There wasn't any real strong concerns at that point. There were some concerns from environmentalist interest about some of the environmentally sensitive areas. So DNR and Forest Service went back to work and put some more maps together, some more information for the work group to show where some of the environmentally sensitive areas may be in relation to the 41,000 acres, as well as some other timber inventory information that was requested. We met again in October. That was after we actually had to push back a few meetings because of the government shutdown, as well as the DWCA fire. Met in October. There was some concerns there expressed about some of the parcels being in environmentally sensitive areas, as well as the suitability for timber production on the land. We went back and gathered some more information. We had a meeting last Wednesday in Sandstone to bring forth that information to the group, and we had some good discussions about the suitability as well as the environmentally sensitive parcels. At the meeting before that in October, it was expressed that at this point we weren't interested in taking parcels off the table, that we wanted to keep 41,000 acres as candidate parcels, knowing that there may be some future review of those parcels. And at the meeting last week, we had some discussion and took the consultation, had some discussions with all the members, and agreed that the group agreed that the work group would be concluded after that last meeting, because we had basically finalized our discussions. At least at this point, there is going to be some follow-up. There were some issues addressed regarding the lands with higher mineral potential, some of the areas in possibly higher mineral potential areas being part of the exchange. So that was an issue expressed by the environmental interest in following with them, kind of as a sideline. The work group kind of closed out with the understanding that that group may still be brought back together for a consultation, but also with the understanding that this is a early step in the process, and there's going to be further discussion as this moves forward. So from there, the next steps on DNR and U.S. Forest Service is to start looking. We have the 41,000 acres that are outside of the DWCA, but now we need to look at what parcels are inside the school trust lands, inside the DWCA, start looking at which parcels to match those up with for the exchange, with the remainder being left over for the sale portion of that. As part of that, so that would be one of the things we'd be looking at, and we could start doing some preliminary looking at the title, see if there's going to be some questionable title on some of the properties. We don't see that as being a big concern. The school trust line has been with the state since statehood, and some of the federal land has both been in the federal government, and they have pretty good records of other land that they acquired, and that was I think back in 30s, 40s, and 50s when they acquired most of that land. Then we'll have to start talking about how these lands will be appraised or how they'll be valued. So DNR and Forest Service will continue to discuss those parcels. We also discussed at the work group meeting how to, since the work group meeting was as a subset of the subcommittee, how to move that back forward to the Permanent School Fund Advisory Committee. And the idea was that Ron would get his BWCA exchange subcommittee back together for a review of the parcels and maybe some detailed discussion, and they could look at the parcels and they give an endorsement. That endorsement could be brought to this committee, and this committee could, and at that point the DNR would present the parcels to this committee for the advice of the committee on how to move forward and by them whether to move forward.
Mr. Burke, isn't there a lot of other work that needs to be done? Isn't there some legislative work and some work at the federal level that also has to be going on at the same time? And where are we on that? I know that I've talked to myself to Senator Klobuchar and to Representative Paulson and Kravach about it, and I've also talked to Senator Franken's office about it. Has anything been pursued with them? I mean, I read it in the paper, saying how paper that something was happening, but I haven't heard anything.
Madam Chair, you're correct that there will still be a lot of work. There's going to be some state legislation, some state legislation, and as well as some federal legislation, primarily for the funding of the sale portion of that. I've had limited contact. We did have one meeting with Representative Paulson that you and some other members of the committee attended. I have had conversations with Representative Kravach's office. I know Bob Meyer at the DNR has indicated that he will be talking to some of the congressional representatives on other issues, and we try to make sure that this issue remains on the radar.
My understanding, this has been going on for quite a while. Do you anticipate this legislation moving forward this year?
I couldn't say for sure. We do have a Form A at the DNR, so we are looking at some legislation that's under review.
I would hope that we could be assertive and have a goal. Mr. Nardi.
Well, Madam Chair, I think you raise a great point. I'm anxious to get the recommendation here back to this table as quickly as possible so that some of you can make the decision on whether you want to introduce that stuff this year. Out of the work group process, we've got a pretty extensive list of both federal and state actions that need to be taken, so I think there's a sort of a roadmap laid out there. I do feel some obligation to the subcommittee to give them another shot at this, but it occurred to me that if we would pick up Jean Merriam and John Herman, most of the subcommittee members are at the table today. And I assume this full group is going to want to look at this exchange proposal pretty closely, so if the subcommittee would agree that they're happy doing their review at the same time, we wouldn't have to hold a separate meeting. So, I don't know, are we expecting Mr. Herman here?
He's at the LCCMR meeting, so he might, the meeting is
Might Well, if we can get at least him in the room, we might want to talk about whether we just forego a subcommittee meeting and have the full discussion in front of this group. That would let us move this along. So, and I would also say that those of you that check in on this periodically probably don't appreciate the kind of difficulty that a public agency has in surrendering land. I give the Forest Service and DNR a lot of credit for getting to an agreement on 41,000 acres here. You heard Representative McNamara talk about that forester going in and marking individual trees. They take some personal ownership of those acres, so I think it was a huge success to get to 41,000 acres here. We've got a few that folks want to look at more closely, but overall I think we've got a package that makes a lot of sense.
I know Ms. Kelleher and I were on our way to a meeting in Hibbing that night, so we stopped at the meeting in Sandstone, and it was quite impressive to see all the maps and how everybody's really looking very intently at things. So I appreciate the work your group has been doing.
I might add to that, some of you may have gotten a notice and some of you may not, but Jim Sanders did announce his retirement yesterday. I'm feeling fairly relieved that we got this agreement before Jim departed in December is when he's going to officially retire. So.
Mr. Kraft, did you have a question?
Madam Chair, in our packet today, there's kind of a flow chart and a timeline on a reasonable timeline, I believe, on getting through this process. The work that the subcommittee has done is kind of a shadow up here just above the title. It's not on this page yet. So there is, I think we've got an opportunity. We've got a proposal that I think as a working group, you know, we agree that is viable. I still hear rumblings that there are some of your colleagues that are not happy and want to come in with a different proposal. With Mr. Sanders announcing his retirement, I think that we're losing a real advocate to try to solve this problem and to try to rectify an injustice that was done to the trust 35, 40 years ago. And if we lose this opportunity to move this forward, I don't think we'll see it back again.
Representative Dietrich?
Yeah, I just want to echo those words of Mr. Krebs. This is the only reason that I continue to say there is a sense of urgency here. And actually, I don't know that they could move any faster. I mean, this whole process is something I don't want to do. That's for sure. But we are, I think, a little vulnerable right now. I think that there is an undercurrent now. There's been a flurry of some media and all that type of stuff, newspaper articles in northern Minnesota, which once again highlighted what this land exchange sale would do. And it has created a new flurry of opposition that we would, and I'm just going to be really honest because I'm not speaking as a state representative or Denise Dietrich right now. I'm talking as a trustee. And I will never mince any words when it comes to my trust obligations. They are saying that we would be foolish to sell any land, and that we won't get the right amount and all that type of stuff. That is, for me, it's I don't necessarily buy into that whole frame of thought, because I say, if you haven't been able to do that in the last 30 years, tell me now what will convince me that now you can do it. And so, but my point being is that they think that there is a group of people that would like to use Congress to get a total exchange done. Now, we have heard over, I think Mr. Nardane, you'd probably be the best person to speak to this. I feel like we have heard from the 4th Division over and over again that a total exchange is not even an option. But, so the question, this is a two-pronged question. So what is our delegation saying about that? Are they going to be out working for a total exchange because of legislative pressure here and undermining our hybrid model that we have all agreed to?
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, I don't think we know. Until we put a formal proposal in the hands of the congressional delegation, I don't think we get that stuff out on the table. The comment's been made several times about the media coverage on this. I told reporters I welcome the exposure on it because, number one, it educated folks about trust fund lands, and number two, it put it out there so anybody that's got a concern about it can step up to the table and get their concerns out there. So I don't think we know the answer to your question until we actually say to the congressional delegation, here, Minnesota's committed to this, we think this works, and they can start their process to find out where they're going to go with it. With respect to whether a full exchange will work here, my personal opinion is this never happens if it's got to be all exchange. It just simply will not happen.
Representative Dietrich.
Mr. Nardane, will you, because this is public, would you explain why?
Oh, sure. I think very simply it takes such a chunk out of the Forest Service land management functions outside of the boundary waters that they're simply not going to surrender those kind of land. So I just don't see it happening.
Thank you.
We found Mr. Herman.
I'm happy to be here. We go back and forth.
So
Good timing.
Yes, so we can address this if you would like to now.
Yeah, just maybe to get John up to speed, we were just doing a little report on the final work of the work group on the BWCA sale and exchange, and they finished their work a week ago up at Sandstone. And the question is, procedurally, to get it in front of this full body, I feel some obligation to get, to engage the subcommittee that we had. You sat there and helped structure this. But it also occurred to me that we're sitting at the table here, and if the subcommittee is comfortable with doing their review when the full advisory committee does their review, we can skip a step and just move this recommendation right in here and get it on the agenda for the January meeting. And I guess that would be my preference. This group surely is going to want to talk about the details on it, so I don't know that time spent by the subcommittee would be necessarily value added at this point. I would just as soon get it in front of the full committee if the subcommittee members are comfortable with that.
Any other members have any comments on that? Mr. Crutch?
I was on that, so it's good.
He just sat in.
No, you don't say. I did hear you speak.
We had no problem with that.
Otherwise, we'll have to schedule a whole separate meeting, and I think there's not any contention about it, so it would be expeditious.
Does the DNR have any comment on it? You were at the meeting.
Madam Chair, there was no that, I would say last time presenting it.
Be happy now, Chancellor.
That sounds great then. So do we want to make a motion to accept your committee's recommendation, or how would you like to do this?
I'll make the motion to recommend to the full advisory committee the proposal for exchange of 41,000 acres of land between the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Natural Resources to be part of a sale and exchange proposal to eliminate the trust fund ownerships within the Boundary Waters Canoe area.
Did you get that? Maybe you could submit that in writing later.
I can
so we
work with that.
Keep that on record.
And I'll second that.
Thank you. Is there any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Wonderful. That will move us forward. Representative Dietrich.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think that is a really good idea because, to Mr. Narvaez's point about being public about this, then we can get this on the agenda, and if there are other people who really want to come and talk about this, they can. But along with that discussion, what I would like to have, and I don't know if we would go to the DNR for this, or if we would go to someone in fiscal research type of staff person, but two scenarios of what the financial impacts to the fund under scenario one, exchanging it all, and scenario two, a partial exchange sale. I actually had somebody call me from up north because of some of the media also saying you ought to sell it all, because if you take out a contract for deed for the federal government and none of the interest, and that's when it gets way beyond me. That's why we need a trustee. And so, anyhow, I don't think we need 5 different scenarios, but I think we just need some general information about what that would mean to the fund in those 2 different scenarios, and just refresh our memory. I think we actually had something at one point.
Oh, yeah, we've actually got some kind of raw estimates, obviously, until you get a better appraisal done on the lands. But in rough numbers, the return on the sale portion could be anywhere from 60 to 100 million directly into the school trust fund. We'd have to have somebody sharpen a pencil up to figure out how that would compare to return over some period of time if we exchanged all the lands, but you have to get them exchanged for there to be any cash flow. So.
Representative Dietrich.
Yeah, and I think just really rough numbers would be, I use what we, if we're thinking they're going to be forested, I think that's what people are intending. Well, you take the 5-year history and you just kind of say these numbers aren't perfect, but it gives us some level of comparison. The other thing is that I would like somebody to take it one step further and say, okay, once that money is in that fund, what does it generate for students? And that is not difficult to do for somebody else, not me. And so just to kind of see what happens to that money deposited over the next 20 years or something like that. What is that per student Because people continually tell me, why are you even interested in this? This is such a small part of education funding. And if you look at this in the full picture, you might be able to say that. But on the other hand, it is $26 a pupil, each year. And so last year, the year that we are in, we were able to give $50 per pupil each year in the biennium to our students, and people were thrilled over that. Well, $26 isn't that far away from $50, and this is every year, forever. And so how we can just say that doesn't matter, or use that rationale, this is just such a small part of education funding, I think people have to start rethinking this source of money and the long-term reliability of it. So, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. I think we'll see if we can maybe get some help from staff on that one. Any other comments or questions on this? If not, we'll move forward. I think we made some progress today. Thank you. Now we're going to go on to a further review of the DNR cost certification process. That we had last time, I think it opened up some questions. Welcome.
Welcome, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dave Schuler. I am the Lands Program Coordinator for the DNR Division of Forestry.
Proceed, that'd be great.
Yes, last month during my presentation to this committee on the cost certification process, I mentioned that there was an internal review of the cost certification process by the department. And you can follow along. I've got these slides in handout number 2 in your packet. I was the project manager of this DNR committee from November 2010 to March of 2011, and we examined the current certification process and then were charged to develop potential alternatives to this process with the 1998 Legislative Auditor's Report in mind. The objectives of this committee were to improve transparency of the certification process and determine the true cost of managing trust land. We brainstormed and reviewed a number of alternatives, and we found most of the alternatives were actually currently authorized under statute, although some of our alternatives would require some legislative changes. So what we did is we examined the certification process and found it to be a long and complicated series of formulas. It took us a long time as a committee to fully understand how this process worked, but once we did, we found it to generally be an accurate way to certify costs. We then examined the management activities that are certified. We looked through all the different activities that the Division of Forestry does, and we found that the ones that were certifying were actually within the statutory authority that we were charged with to certify against and reflect the true cost of trust land management. Big thing we found out is we examined some alternative calculation methods and discovered that if we actually stratified our costs by administrative area, it more accurately reflected the true cost of trust land management. And by that I mean, in some of our administrative areas we have a lot of trust land, and in other areas we have very little trust land. And we shouldn't be charging the same amount of cost for our foresters to manage land down in an area where they have very little trust land, where you're not getting much revenue out. We should be concentrating those costs on those administrative areas where there's more trust land. And we also looked at alternatives to the cost certification process that fall outside of the current statutory authority, and looked at scenarios such as the minerals management account where there's a fixed appropriation, and looked at how that might work as well. So when we got through all those recommendations and spent a lot of time looking at the various things we could do, we looked at an alternative that we thought was really the best alternative that stratifies these costs by areas, and we found it to be the most efficient, accurate, and best reflects the true cost of managing trust land forests. And as you'll see from this chart, it actually increased the revenue to the permanent school fund by about 45%. And that's what the department recommends in using for this current certification process for 2011. You will note that this alternative does impact the general fund, and it reduces the returns to the general fund by about $1 million. To put this all into perspective, and hopefully to help Representative Dietrich understand how forestry fits into the economy and how we're actually doing as an agency. If you look at the revenue, the return on revenue as a percentage over the last 4 years, you can look at this top chart here, and in 2007 it was about a 28% of the revenue was returned to permanent school fund after taking out our costs. And in 2008 it was up to almost 29%. We had a major drop in 2009, mostly due to the economy. The price of timber crashed considerably, and we actually increased our management costs a little bit to try to cover more of our true costs, and then with that, we also did some additional management, and there's some other fire issues that came in there. So our costs increased considerably, and there was only a 2% return on the investment there. But then in 2010, it's creeped up to 10% of revenue. And with the current proposal, the new alternative, we're looking at increasing it back up to almost 27% return. And to put that in a national perspective, you'll see the chart on the right-hand side there. This is the top Fortune 500 companies, taking kind of a selection of those from 2008. And if you look at the returns, networking and other communication equipment, they're getting about a 20% revenue return on their investment. That's one of the top companies or top industries in the world as far as returns. If you look down at number 50, which is the forest and paper products, they lost 10% in 2008. So essentially, I think the permanent school fund is actually doing quite well considering how the timber industry has been going over the past number of years. Now, why did we do so well? Well, it's mostly because we're still subsidizing the trust. Not included in the cost that we certify to the trust are bonding dollars that we receive to purchase trees and prepare sites for planting. And also time spent on real estate leases, paid to the general fund. That's not certified either, those costs, which generate about $500,000. So the bonding dollars is almost $2.5 million that we spend to the trust, and we're not getting any of that money back. Questions?
Mr. Sokol.
Madam Chair, Mr. Schuler, back to the first slide, the DNR committee met, was it solely DNR committee meeting on the certification process? Was there unbiased third party questioning the review of checking of alternatives?
Madam Chair, Mr. Silko, it was an internal review, so it was only DNR folks that were involved, but we had representatives from all our divisions involved in that process.
Ms. Phillips.
Madam Chair, I've been quite quiet today. I'm frankly exhausted because the last 3 months I've been rattling a tin cup for school funding, trying to renew an operating levy that was going to expire. I rattled the tin cup with duct tape on my mouth and my hands behind my back because statute says that I can't advocate for passage, which makes it quite challenging. Thankfully, our community realized and passed the operating levy at 68%, which they've never done. The comments I heard from the community is they're a little upset that the state of Minnesota borrowed $25 million in IOU to our school district last year because of the shift, and they will borrow $34 million from our district this year because of the shift. I have a little bit of seething rage in me right now with the statement you just made that the trust has been subsidizing. You've subsidized. The school trust lands have been subsidizing the DNR for over 100 years. And I don't see, and I'm not begrudging any DNR staff person that's sitting here, but I don't know how many of you have had to rattle a tin cup the way we have had to for public schools. There's a great book out right now, and it was at one of the authors, who's a foreign policy leader, wrote the book along with Thomas Friedman from St. Louis Park. It's called, I highly recommend it, That Used to Be Us. And the book argues that we've gone down in the nation, we've gone down in the state in what we're doing. And the answer is, and this is a direct quote from the book, the stability and prosperity of the 21st century will be maintained or lost in the classrooms of America's public schools. And I think we need to take a hard look at what we're doing with these school trust lands. I am so reassured that it appears to be a nonpartisan issue and that we are united that we need to maximize the potential of these lands. But I'm disheartened when I read that the assistant commissioner says, we think, given the makeup of the trust lands, that creating a separate agency to manage these would be counter to the best interests of the trust. I think a lot of the things we've been doing in the last 100 years have been counter to the best interests of the trust. And I just urge us to stop the paralysis. I've been on this committee for 5 years, and I feel we're paralyzed in many ways. We talk, we have reports. Let's get something done. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Phillips. Did you have anything you wanted to comment on that?
Thank you, Madam Chair, Ms. Phillips. All I can say is that we are trying to manage the trust land to the best of our abilities. And I know Representative McNamara made some comments earlier about the management that we do. There's no free lunch out there, and I know that this education community is feeling that pain considerably. But in order to manage lands, in order to get revenue back from those lands, it costs money. It costs money to do any kind of business, and we're trying our best to reduce our costs. And you can see that in our proposal for the recertification process. We cut over 50 positions in the Division of Forestry in the past 2 years, just because of budget deficits and retirements, and we're not refilling those. We're trying to do the best we can with the number of people that we have.
I have a question. You call this a proposal. Are you going to do it, or do you need legislation? What would stop you from changing the way that you do the process?
Madam Chair, I guess my understanding is we're going to go forward with it, and we would like to get the agreement from this committee that this is the way to go.
Mr. Morgan.
Madam Chair, Mr. Schuler, given some of the comments that have been made, is there a document that captures all of this so that the committee could review the alternatives that were examined and the impact that had on the trust fund?
There is an internal document that we developed that does go through all the alternatives. It's about 40 pages long. It's a very involved document, but we could provide that to the committee if you would like to look at that.
Did you want to follow up on that?
Well, Madam Chair, I just think, given the questions that have come up, we'll have to take a look at it. 40 pages or 80 pages, I don't care how long it is. We have to see what the numbers look like.
Can you get that information to us then, and we can forward it on to all the members?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, just a quick question. You had the, on the chart, I can't remember which one it was here, no one up. It's, you were talking about percent revenue to PSF. 2007, 2008, both at 28% roughly, or maybe 29. And then 2009, it was a precipitous drop down to 2%. You had mentioned that that was due to some increase in costs, but I know there was also a huge drop in timber prices throughout that time. You ended up reletting bids, or taking back some bids and reletting again because the industry just wasn't able to collect that wood. So from a standpoint, I'm curious from a standpoint of increased expenses versus decreased revenue, what was the margin there? And then of the increased expenses, how much of that is going to be ongoing increase that stays with us versus one time?
Mr. Schuler?
Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, those are very good questions. I don't have those numbers offhand for you, but I'll take some notes on that and we'll try to get back to you.
Even just ballpark would be great if you can.
You could forward them to me and I could forward them on to the full committee.
Well,
Mr. Murphy?
Madam Chair, you had listed on the bottom of the agenda the other requests that had been made.
Right.
And I was interested in looking at the administrative costs because my recollection is when we started reviewing this back 3 years ago, I think, there was a substantial jump in administrative costs charged against the fund in 2009, and that was part of this reduction in return to the fund. Are we going to get to that here, or are we going to do that in another?
Well, we could probably insert it in here, I would think. We had requested this information from the DNR when we had a planning meeting on October 26th. So does the DNR have a response to that request of information we had?
Yes, Madam Chair, we did. We were going to cover it later in the agenda, but if you'd like...
Would you rather...
I don't care when we do it, I just want to make sure we do it.
If you're ready to, let's go ahead and do it now because I think it's urgent right now.
Okay.
Madam Chair, before we go on to that, may I ask a quick question?
Representative Dietrich, yes.
Thank you. I need to re-clarify a couple of things. So your proposal would increase revenue to the trust fund by 45% in the area of forestry? Is that what I heard you say?
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, that is correct. So you would be getting $1 million to $1.5 million more in the next certification process. Yes.
I'm trying to think quickly. This year, 2010, you put $900,000 into the fund. What year are you basing that off of?
2010. So in 2010, 2010, it was $980,000 to the permanent school fund. In 2011, we're looking at $2.6 million to the permanent school fund. It's actually much more than 45%.
I was wondering if we already keep what we were already getting, if this is an over and above 45%.
This is over and above what you've got.
Okay, and I think that's fine, but how are you going to figure that out each year?
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, it's a long and involved calculation. Basically what we do is we go through all our costs, and those are they're coded each hour that a person works on land, and then we go through a stratification process where we look at the costs in various areas that have trust land and stratify our costs by those. And basically, in doing so, it reduces the fire costs considerably because most of the fires are not in the trust land area. So we reduce those costs considerably, and some of the other costs are reduced as well.
Thank you. So that's interesting. I think we all need to make note of that a lot of that area is the fire costs, which even the legislative auditor said in 1998 that you were charging us too much. Okay, and you're saying now that this is going to impact the general fund. I don't know how you can make the statement that you are not, that the school trust funds are not subsidizing the general fund, but when you get to what you call more of a true cost, then you're short. That's just dichotomy there that I don't understand either one way or the other. But the other thing that so we have had, and I just want to make a comment for the committee too, is that we have had private foresters also come in and say that we should be at, for every dollar earned, we should be more at like 80 cents on the dollar going to the school trust funds. And the state of Washington actually has a lot better return too on their forestry lands. And so so when we say, and then we have the DNR and their cost structure. And so we've got some different, things to look at out there. And then you use the words, the true cost of the trust fund management. Well, I would say that we really don't know what the true costs are, because it seems like if we put pressure on you, then, well, maybe we can reduce the fire management, or maybe we can reduce this, or maybe this isn't totally, accurate or whatever. I don't know that anybody knows what the true costs are, because I don't think we can really separate out how much of this is an overlap of trying to pursue the mission of the DNR and the state, which I don't think are bad things. I mean, I think they're very good things. Your mission and vision is very, very valid, and we respect it a lot. So, I would wonder if this change, how this is going to play out. I understand how it will next year, but I don't understand then how it will play out into the future, for the next 20, 30, 40, 50. And actually, it's a trust fund. It's supposed to last for 100 years.
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, this is a change in the way we're doing calculations for the certification process. It should continue on into the future. It should be, this increase should remain unless we have a huge downturn in the economy again that affects the price of timber. We should be pretty stable at that amount to the trust.
Representative Dietrich.
And I just want to thank you, Madam Chair, I just want to make the comment for the record, and I realize that most of my comments are probably very naive when it comes to land management. But even in 2009, in the downturn, we still sold $10 million worth of forestry logging. It was that we spent every dime we made. So we have to be real careful. And if you take the 5-year average, it is right around $10 million each year. And in some years it's been a little bit more. But the whole point is that we do not change our behaviors in the downturn, which most people would change their behaviors. So I just want to make that point. It just makes it look like the trust fund is getting no money. We still sold $10 million worth of lumber on school trust funds.
Another comment I would have is if you're going to have a coding system that's going to be able to account for things, you should be able to find out FTEs much faster and easier too, I would think. Would that not be the answer?
Well, that's how we determine the FTEs for this presentation today.
Any other comments yet?
Well, Madam Chair, I just want to say that it's difficult to engage in the kind of detailed discussion that Representative Dietrich brings up without having a proposal on the table. The comment about private foresters saying we ought to have a certain return on these lands. If you put one of those foresters up there, let them make that statement, and then ask them if they're going to take on the responsibility to build forest roads and bridges and take on the responsibility for fire control, that story will change. They're not going to do that. They can look at it very simply on management costs. When we start talking about comparing Minnesota to Washington State on timber return, if we can figure out how to make it rain 183 days a year here, and we can raise the same species that we raise in Washington, then maybe we can get on the same plane with them. You have to look at the factors that go into managing a forest, and just throwing those statements out doesn't give everybody a fair chance to make a judgment on it. So I'd really like to see a level playing field if we're going to talk about costs here. And to do that, I think we got to have a proposal on the table, and I come back to ask them for the report so that we can see what they looked at, how it costed out, and then we can ask her specific questions about it.
Good point. Mr. Herman?
Could you just tell me, I understand what you're saying about fire protection and that you actually were able to code it and determine that for fire protection you were going to do 10% rather than 44%. But is there a comparable coding that led you to conclude that for mineral and mineral surface management and timber sale, reforestation, and forest improvement, you were just going to go with the same percentage as the percentage in the aggregate land area that the department's managing of timber property? I mean, here's a little different way to ask the question. If you're only putting 5% of your investment in roads and bridges into getting access to the school trust lands, are we really putting 45% of our mineral management into managing the portion of the school trust fund lands that have minerals on them? Or should that number be 65%? Or should it be 22%?
Madam Chair, Mr. Herman, I can't comment on the minerals management because I don't deal with minerals management on state level. But the percentages that we developed, these are generally statewide, but when we stratify them, they jump around because if you look up in the Northeast where most of the trust fund land is, we may be certifying 90% of our costs because it's all trust land up there. Versus when you get down into central Minnesota and there's only 10% of the land that's trust land, we're only certifying 10% of our costs down there. And that's why the fire cost shook out the way it does, because when you get into central Minnesota, that's where the majority of our fires are, but there's very little trust land in that area. And that's why the cost for fire protection went down with the new scenario.
Well, Madam Chair, just one little follow-up. It's not so much a question as a comment. I agree with Mr. Nardang. In one sense, it's not fair to compare us with the forestry returns in some other states that have better forestry land. One of the big reasons we ended up with this large amount of school trust land up north is it is not the most productive land. And so to try to manage it well and get a reasonable return, we have to invest in it. On the other hand, we have mineral potential on our land that's probably a lot better than many other places. So I think we ought to see this report and try to understand better. I'm always suspicious when the number comes out precisely the same as the split of the acreage, that for some reason, at least in those areas, they didn't do a very good cost allocation. It seems like on roads and bridges and fire protection, we've made a lot of progress in trying to figure out where the money actually is being spent. So I think if the committee looked at it, we'd have a better idea of whether we had a good cost certification or if we were still relying on kind of just generalized percentage allocations based on acreage.
I agree. I think that we need to get that report, be able to look at it, and at our next meeting decide whether we want to give a nod to it or not. That would be okay with you. Representative Downey?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for entering late here and maybe asking you to go over some ground you've already covered. So there's a cost certification process review that you undertook, and that was based in part on the 1998 Legislative Auditor's Report. So we went about 12 years from the Legislative Auditor's Report to the point that we did this review process at the DNR. And so my question is, do you have a regular recurring process of reviewing all of these internal calculations and mechanisms, or is it only kind of at the request of the legislature or when some event maybe brings it back to the surface?
Madam Chair, Representative Downey, this cost certification process that we've been using up to the current time was reevaluated back in 2001 or 2002, something like that. Did you get a chance to remember that? It was in the early to mid 2000s, so we did a reevaluation process at that time. And then with the concerns of this committee, we decided that we should reevaluate it again and see if there's something we missed, and that's why we did that.
I'm just wondering if this proposal would go through. You said it's going to affect our general fund. I'm hoping Mr. Representative McNair might be listening. He's not. You want to give us attention?
Madam Chair, can I follow up with a question that might actually...
Yes.
So I'm covering more ground, so I'm looking at your chart on the cost certification alternative, and it looks like the transfer to the general fund goes down by roughly 0.9 million, and the transfer to the school fund goes up by 0.8 million. And I'm just wondering if you could explain to me what portion of the general fund is that? Is that some DNR account that is now diminished by 800,000, or where is that coming out of the general fund to go to the permanent school fund?
Madam Chair, committee members, I think we need to keep in focus what the statute says. The reason we stratified the protection costs, they are paid from the general fund. The statute tells us that protection costs are then transferred back to the general fund. So if we are reducing those costs by stratifying suppression costs by area, naturally that would reduce the return to the general fund, as well as administration costs. As those are reduced, that would reduce the return to the general fund. Management improvement and roads is transferred back to the forest management investment account. So we are transferring the costs as statute tells us to.
Madam Chair, just to clarify then, so that's coming straight out of the general fund, so the burden of that would be borne by all agencies and all functions and funds that are funded by the general fund. So this isn't like a direct reduction of DNR operating budgets. Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Mr. Gargay, you had a question about the 2009, the differences in administrative costs. Have you had your question answered yet, or you want to pursue it?
Well, just, Madam Chair, in looking at the information in front of us, I see trim stuff, and I confess I stepped out for a minute. Did we get specific numbers on the administrative cost charged against the fund?
No. Madam Chair, committee members, we don't have specific numbers, but we do have general, just broad statements on why the cost increased from 2006 to 2010 in that time frame. What we did is in the department, we took an overall look at the activities we charged against administration. Okay, so in order to make this fair, we had to answer two questions. Are these administration costs, can they be traced back to trust lands? Plus, does this activity generate revenue? We had to answer yes to both questions. Okay? If it did not generate revenue, we excluded that cost to keep it fair. Another component of the increase in cost is we have an aging workforce. As retirements occur, those costs will decrease as the younger workforce comes in. Okay, so we are seeing some of these costs stabilize now. The wild card for us is fire activity. If we have a high fire season, we are spending less time on management improvement and roads because we're spending so much time on fire activity.
Mr. Margay?
Well, Madam Chair, so do you have the numbers in front of you on what the increase in administrative costs charged to the trust fund was from, I don't care, whatever you've got, from 2006 to 2010 or from 2007 to 2009? Do you have any of those?
Madam Chair, committee members, no, I do not have the numbers in front of me, but an example of that would be perhaps salaries or leave time off. That would have increased due to our aging workforce. We have travel costs, fleet costs. I don't have the specific numbers in front of me.
We do have a chart from 2009 that was done, and we'll make copies of it And so we can discuss it further. We just,
Okay.
the DNR report.
Why don't we proceed, Madam Chair, and when we get that in front of us, then maybe we can come back.
That sounds good. Also, and I'm not sure if this is the right time to mention it, but we also put in the packets, I had responded to the request to have the PowerPoint from the DNR about the Minnesota forest industry models and the harvesting, and we did make copies. It's kind of, we put the attached, there was one extra sheet added on the top, but then the PowerPoint is underneath, which I think leads into the next section, doesn't it? The overview of the process for selecting areas for timber sales. Compare the process between the school trust lands and the non-trust lands. Oh, did you finish your slides? I'm sorry. I could see there's an administrative costs. There's that.
Yeah. Yes, Madam Chair, I think we're fine. Okay, I think the next question was overview of the process for selecting areas for timber sales.
Yes, please proceed.
Our planning process uses our forest inventory to map out a 10-year plan for timber harvest and regeneration based on age, type, and distribution of stands of timber in a geographical area called an ecological subsection. This process is called the State Forest Resource Management Planning Process, or SFRMP. Each year, the 10-year plan provides us with a list of forest stands to examine that are mature and provide a desired distribution of type and age throughout the forest, or are in anticipated need of intermediate treatment, such as thinning of a pine stand. The selected stands examined, once a forester goes out and takes a look at the selected stands, they look to see if there's any issues that may prevent harvest, such as the age is wrong, the inventory is wrong, the condition's wrong, the access, or it might be too difficult to get in there, or there's other environmental concerns. If none of those issues exist, then the timber is ready to harvest. The forest estimates the volume, marks the boundaries, and writes up a sale packet that includes the value and conditions of sale. And then the timber is sold on an oral or sealed bid auction to the highest bidder. All state land is included in the process regardless of the land type, whether it's trust land, acquired land, consolidated conservation land. We manage lands on an ecological unit, not on an individual basis. And sometimes we sell stands of timber. It may be a homogeneous stand of aspen or red pine, and it may actually cross from acquired land into trust land. And it's more efficient to manage it that way. And we make sure we have the acreages and everything accurate so that trust gets the revenue from the trust part, and the other land type gets the revenue from that portion. And the reason we do this is the trust land scattered. It's the nature of the beast out there. The trust acquired this land from the federal government back in the late 1800s as mostly Section 16 and 36 of each township. So right there, you split up the land into two 640-acre pieces in each township, and it's scattered. So it makes it difficult to manage that as an individual piece of property throughout the state when you've got other state lands that's right next to it, and you can manage them together. Any questions on that?
So you done with that portion then?
Yes.
Okay. What determines the oral or sealed bidding process?
Madam Chair, committee members. For the most part, it kind of depends on how the economy is going. If it looks like there's going to be a lot of demand for timber, we'll have an oral auction where we'll get loggers in and they'll bid against each other to try to bid up the prices. One of the problems with that is at times we'll run into situations like back in the early to mid 2000s where the prices got so high that loggers actually outbid the cost that they could actually do the work for, and basically we're losing money. They bid too much for the timber, and we're not able to recoup their costs, and that's why we had some of those sales go default. So oral bidding can be a little bit tricky, but it's usually up to the local area or region to decide how they want to structure those.
Representative Downey.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And if you're going to get to this, you can just ask me to hold my question. So I had a chance to look at the MFI report, and they talked about some kind of modeling system, which it sounds like you are using, and it sounds to me like what you just described in the last few slides are the inputs into that modeling system to determine what kind of harvesting to do in any given period in any given zone. And they talk about taking away some constraints that you have applied as a DNR in that model. You mentioned these ecological zones and the stand age and timber type and the distribution being factors in there. Can you comment at all on the suggested removal of certain constraints that MFI would propose compared to the constraints that you have? It looks like it's related to pre-selected harvest schedules, old forest constraints, and age class constraints.
Mr. Schuler.
Oh, Madam Chair, Representative Downey, I'm not sure I can comment on that right now. I just received this, like you did this morning, and haven't had a full chance to really look at that. And I don't know if I'm actually in the position to comment on that, but we will get the comment back from the department on that.
Representative Downey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Maybe just a higher level question. And I didn't catch your term, but it has something to do with ecological something zones. Are those is that the, I don't know, kind of the partitioning, not a forester obviously, that any public or private sector organization would do in terms of kind of stratifying and looking at its timber to determine what kind of a harvest schedule to put on, or does the DNR use something that's unique to DNR processes compared to what private sector folks might do?
Madam Chair, Representative Downey, the ecological subsections were developed by the U.S. Forest Service and the Department of Natural Resources that basically group areas that are similar in type, that have similar types of vegetation, similar types of water resources, those types of things. So they're very, in a general way, homogeneous. To go on the grand scale, you've got basically three large ecotypes in Minnesota. You've got the northern forest, you've got the transition zone, and then to the southwest, you've got the prairie zone. And then those are further divided up into other areas. So any land manager is going to probably use those same types of ecotypes, eco zones for management planning, because you're going to be doing a lot of the same kind of work in the same kind of management on those versus a different eco zone.
I'm just wondering, it was on the list that we got, the DNR provided us this PowerPoint on October 31st, and so the members all got it ahead of time. Was there anybody else at the DNR that might have been prepared to respond to that, other than yourself? No? To Representative Downey's question that we had earlier. Mr. Representative Downey, did you want to restate your question that you had earlier?
Madam Chair, Bob Tomlinson with DNR.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, Mr. Tomlinson. So it sounds like, from the comments I just heard, that in general, the way organizations, DNR, Forest Service, or private harvesters would kind of look at lands in these ecological zones is maybe roughly parallel. But then in the MFI document, it talks about the way DNR, it looks like, uses some kind of software tool to model your harvesting program. And that, obviously you put in certain parameters and things into that to determine how much you're going to harvest, where and when. And it that implies, it actually specifically states on the back page of their PowerPoint that if you remove some constraints that are imposed by the DNR for whatever reasons, I don't know, that you can actually substantially increase the harvest under some different modeling scenarios. And so I guess my question is, when you look at the constraints that they seem to say you have imposed on the harvesting model, some pre-selected harvest schedule, I don't know what that means. Old forest constraints, I think we can assume that we know what that means. Age class constraints, I don't know if I know what that means, but if you remove all of those DNR imposed constraints on the harvest schedule, you could dramatically increase the harvest. And so I guess the question is, do you agree with that? Is that accurate? And then if so, then what's maybe the value of those constraints that the DNR is imposing as compared to somebody from the private sector looking at it?
Mr. Tomlinson?
Madam Chair, members, you asked some really good questions, and I'm not going to be able to get into the details of them. I really would encourage you to have perhaps somebody like John Nelson from our planning staff that comes in that helps oversees the modelers that go into the stand selection and things like that. I think it's fair to say that there are, to answer one of your questions, was, yeah, if we remove the constraints, there would be more timber available to offer. But then there would be also less values accrued, non-timber related types of things. And so that's what we have to kind of weigh and go into this understanding what you're giving up. So for example, with the extended rotation forest, we're managing the aspen type as an example at an extended rate so that we can better balance out the age class of aspen distribution across the state on an annual basis, harvesting in the future. And keep in mind that we've been dealing with a lot of older wood in aspen for the last 20 years of harvesting. We're now getting into some stands where we're finally starting to have 40-year-old aspen, 45-year-old aspen that we're going to be offering and things. And that's all, and that's a good thing. That's a result of the past management trying to, I want to say liquidate, but trying to cut down some of the older stuff and eventually get to the younger things like that. And so I want to make the point that our modeling, we're not just looking at it for the current year or the next year or two, but we're trying to look at it for 20, 30 years out, and what's the forest going to look like with the proper age class balancing within the aspen type, as an example. And there's a lot of thought and a lot of discussions that goes into that, not only internally within DNR, but also with the forest products industries and others. We meet quarterly with the NFI folks and talk about this issue with them. And, I think in large part we agree more often than not, but, there are some constraints to that.
Thank you. Any other questions on this section? Okay. I would suggest we take a 5-minute break. Would you agree that we need to be able to stand up during that? So we'll come back in 5 minutes.
All right.
Probably not.
Good forester.
Find yourself? Well, she had said yes. Oh, yeah, so we're just waiting for an update. It'll probably be a week or two before it's scheduled. outside. Yeah.
Why did she end up having it?
Well, they're starting to take this place. One of the reasons that she was anemic is that her spleen was consuming her red blood cells. And so I think she'll feel about 50% better when she recovers from this. So that's right, yes. And he's in the process of getting ready for his pacemaker. That surgery that they're actually called ablation, where they first just burn some nerves off and try to sit him down. But in preparations for it, he discovered that she had blood why? Cleaning was that a result of cancer? In fact, it wasn't. Fix this thing a little bit so that blood can back out and then maybe do something. So it's a process. She's into it.
You gonna be up there? Mom should be right there with the husband. Sure. I want to be
I wonder if they always keep these cold things adjusted because usually nobody's in here.
Well, I could step downstairs and ask the surgeon's office too.
Yeah. They could make it up. We're all cold over here.
She's close.
Yeah. It's chilly.
It's cold in there. Well, I heat her down.
I don't think the legislature can afford to do that.
Well, yeah, in Dave made a position in her right here. Okay.
Here's Kim.
Yeah, you know, I talked to Dave about that. And Dave said that please don't want to what's that? This is the county. They just have to make 80 hours of I don't have that real college.
You're recording, by the way. I'm here with the department. Nice to meet you.
You're with the department?
Yep.
Okay. How's your life going?
It's busy. Been there for
Lots of issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't see. So, here we go.
Anytime you need us to support you, just decide.
Okay, let's get back to our seats if we can.
Oh, hi, Bob, Great Marcus. I work with Jim Olson.
That's right. I see you all the time. Just replace the names.
Yeah, yeah.
You should be able to-
Yes.
Oh, no, we've been there, and that's where that 10-year period and no return to the trust.
We'll wait for a couple more members to be seated and then we'll proceed.
Carol said for me again. I think I have to go back and.
Okay, I appreciate your coming. We needed you at that time.
Yeah, it was perfect
It
timing.
was perfect.
And Ron and I will make an effort to connect. We've been talking about trying to see if we could focus a little of Bill Richards' lobbying energy for the state on this, because he definitely gets it and was with Overstar when Overstar tried to do this with lock-on money, and I think he's the right guy to try. This guy, Bill Richards, that's the state's Washington lobbyist. He used to be Overstar's aide. So he's a little bit of continuity between the last effort to try to fund this buyout and the present going forward. It's very well regarded. Thank you. Yeah, so we could maybe, we'll try to do that in the next few weeks and maybe give a report.
Oh, okay. I was supposed to be on Tuesday, we got the snow, and then it was gone by the time I get to go.
Where did you get it from?
We were
Okay, I think we're ready to go. Thank you. Okay, before we proceed with the next item, I just wanted to take the opportunity to review the handout that was when we were talking about administrative costs. If there were any questions or any comments? Ms. Phillips.
Madam Chair, when we have public forums in education, one of the first questions we're asked is what % of your annual expenditure budget is on administration? We never fail to get that question. And I can tell you for our particular school district, it's a little lower than 4% a year, which is considerably lower than the state average. So I guess my question is, I'm not looking for the detailed, we were unable to answer the detailed question, but I hope we will get that, the administrative costs for our particular world. But what percentage of the DNR costs yearly are expended for administration? And I ask that in light of this chart that, I believe we saw this before, but when I look at this chart, the forestry certified costs in thousands between 2004 and 2009. When we look at protection in 2004 as opposed to 2009, in that 5-year span, the costs are 1.16 times more. Forest management, 2.3 times more. You go down the list, but when it comes to administration, it's 4.2 times more in that 5-year span. The total costs from 2004 to 2009 increased about 1.8 times. I'm just curious what encumbered that 4.2 times increase in administration between 2004 and 2009. If you're able to answer that question.
Mr. Schuler.
Madam Chair, Ms. Phillips, you can't really comment. I'd like to really give you more detail on it so you really understand it, and I don't have the numbers in front of me at this time, but we will get back to you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
And I would have you give that to the chair and I'll give it to everyone.
Thank you.
And then we can discuss it in more detail. Ms. Representative, do you have anything else you wanted to highlight on this, or just make sure we have it?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, I felt bad though. I should have given you the one with the 2010 numbers in it too. We do have those numbers now, and so we should be including that. But I don't have that in my packet of information. But there is a 2001 with the 2010 on it.
So maybe we can get the updated version sent out to all the members also. Okay. Okay, we'll go on to the next section, the DNR review of internal land swap initiatives in the process.
Madam Members of the Committee, Kathy Lewis again. You asked for a brief update about this. Step back to what drives the exchanges that the DNR does. There was a law enacted in 1985. It's Minnesota Statute 92.121. It provides that the commissioner looks at lands where management practices applied to the permanent school lands would result in diminishing or prohibition of revenue generation. And we also are required to look to see if an alternative has been put in place to compensate the permanent school fund for the income losses. And if we have not put an alternative in place, we're to look at exchanging the permanent school fund land. And the focus of the statute is on state parks, state recreation areas, wildlife management areas, scientific and natural areas, state wetland sites, or lands managed by the Commissioner's old growth stands. After the law was enacted, the first focus of DNR was on state parks and state recreation areas, and the department worked on that for a number of years. In 1992, there were 5,357 acres exchanged out of 15 parks, and the school fund received an equivalent value of land. It was 4,543 acres that was received in exchange. At that point, the exchange program said we can't find any more lands that are located within the same counties to exchange, and so there was some lands remaining in the state parks. When we turned back to the project in 2006, we said, well, we can move to doing exchanges crossing county boundaries as long as we had DNR lands that had the same payment amount, so then the counties would not object to that issue. And so when we took that step, we basically went through an effort to exchange 4,908 acres. In that case, we were exchanging some beautiful pine lands in Nurstrand Wood State Park, and the state fund received 10,913 acres as a result of that exchange, as they were equivalent value for value. And so that completed the exchange of school trust lands out of state parks and recreation areas where revenue generation is prohibited. We do have some school trust lands remaining in the Atlantic State Park. Some of those lands are generating revenue through mining leases. We also have some school trust lands remaining in the Kind of Country recreation area, and they have potential for generating mineral revenue too. So both of those land classes have mineral potential revenue generation or are generating revenue. The focus then of the department turned to old growth forest. There was approximately 20,000 school trust lands located in old growth forest. We worked our way through the process for land exchanges, came before the Permanent School Fund Advisory Board for acting as temporary trustee, went back to the Land Exchange Board. They approved our first land exchange for old growth on September 27, 2010. There were 998 acres of school trust land exchanged for 1,429 acres of consolidated conservation land in Coochin County. At that same board meeting, the land exchange board also approved an exchange of 89 acres of school trust land for 160 acres of required forestry land in Cass County. And this exchange involved the use of school trust lands for school forests. You may remember the discussion in 2010 before the committee about school forests. We were looking at a small exchange for acquired wildlife land in W. Main St. Louis County. That project was put on hold in 2010. It had been held up because the property has federal aid restrictions, and the federal aid staff have to work through a complicated process with the feds to release the land from federal aid restrictions. The current plan now is to, rather than doing an exchange, is to transfer the property to the Forestry Division for management for revenue generation. Currently, the department is focusing on the DWCAW land exchange issue. As we've identified, it's going to be a tremendous impact financially to the school trust fund. Another thing that we're doing is we're looking at land asset management. It is having a stronger focus in the DNR. Bob Tomlinson has been assigned to work on land asset management with the department staff. And we know exchanges and sales will be a component of land asset management. As part of that management, we've had a pilot project for Roseau County. And for example, we had a recent project where we exchanged school trust land for county fee land. And in that case, the department has been proceeding to do a condemnation action of the school trust land so that it can be used for wildlife purposes. Assistant Commissioner Mary McConnell also will talk about a school trust operational order, and that's going to be providing additional direction on future changes. Finally, in connection with the next legislative session, we've kept this issue in mind regarding bonding requests, and that's an issue that's also being looked at by the department.
Any questions on that? Just wondering if the DNR has talked about doing a land swap with others so that the lands would be more adjacent. Has that ever been a priority? So that it wouldn't be as hard to manage those?
Madam Chair, that issue is consolidation of lands for management purposes. It is a factor that the department looks at, and that usually our exchanges brought forth by our forestry division. Consolidation for mineral purposes is not always the issue, because once you start severing surface ownership and mineral ownership rights and management, you can sometimes get in conflict. So, but it's certainly a factor that's been looked at. And a few years ago, the legislature passed a law for expedited exchanges of land. But I just remember now does not include school trust land, but it is a consolidation is a factor for some of the DNR management activities.
Madam Chair, I can speak on that also. Division of Forestry is currently engaged in conversations with no less than 3 counties of doing major land exchanges to try to consolidate the ownerships. So we're working towards that. It's a long process, though.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Johnston, I know you had sent a request for some information. Does that fit into this section, or is that?
Yes, Madam Chair, I think it does. We had back about, it was at least 2 years ago, I believe, we had, I think we met over at the Capitol that time, and we had approved as a committee, as I remember, a recommendation to pass forward the transfer of about 1,800 acres, and this is all off the top of my head, in northeastern Minnesota, with this, this is exterior to the BWCA. But I'm just wondering if that proceeded through, and I might have missed it in your presentation, Kathy, I'm not sure. But, and then I guess I had a couple other questions, or another question beyond that, but I'm going to let you answer that one first. Has there been any transfers between DNR land and the school trust fund lands here in the last couple, 3 years?
Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, the exchange that you referred to that the Permanent School Fund Advisory Committee had approved made it through the rest of the process. and those are the ones I described that were approved by the Land Exchange Board in September of 2010. So that has been approved. The school trust land, most recently that was passed on September 7th, 2011, was the last one I mentioned, which was school trust land for county fee land. So that was not an internal swap, but it is the same philosophy here, looking at land. We particularly, when we looked at that issue, it's very important to the department of, are we doing a land exchange that benefits the school trust? That's one of our principal issues we look at. It's one of the issues that the Lands Minerals Division particularly focuses on. That has to be answered positively. And we also look at, say, if we have an exchange going on that does raise revenue generation prohibitions, then what are we going to do to address it? So the last one we just did, where it's school trust land for county fee land, the Wildlife Division wants to take that land that's now school trust land and use it for wildlife purposes, and we've started a condemnation action in the school trust interest, so that land will be, the school trust interest will be condemned, the school trust will receive revenue, and wildlife will use that land for wildlife purposes.
Mr. Johnson?
Follow up, thank you. I haven't thought this through very well, but I thought I might as well throw it out as long as it's on the top of my head. I keep thinking about there are parcels that are put up for sale each year every so often of school trust fund lands. If there are any of those parcels that are would be advantageous to wildlife, but DNR necessarily can't purchase them, just a thought is, I don't know if it would be absolutely applicable, but potentially as a way for conservation groups to work through the Lessard Council grant process to help acquire some of those lands. And like I said, I haven't thought that all the way through, but I'll just throw it on the table and as a thought to consider.
Thank you. No comment? Not sure. Yes, Senator Rowland?
I'm pretty naive about this whole issue, but these public trust lands currently are open for hunting, right? And are they not? I mean, doesn't wildlife currently inhabit them? I'm trying to figure out the benefit of switching them over to another division, so to speak. I mean, I can see where it might make sense if we could sell them for the school trust fund, and as a trustee, I guess I shouldn't try and put a stop to it. But as a legislator, I'm sitting here thinking, does it make sense? I don't know if anybody has an answer.
Anybody have any comment on that?
Well, Madam Chair, Representative Roebling, I think the difference would be whether there are school trust parcels embedded in a wildlife management area. And I'm trying to think, there are places up far northeast like the Pigeon River area, south of Grand Portage, where that's probably true, and I think some of those lands will show up on the exchange maps that we look at. I suppose the argument could be made there that it's our obligation to the school trust to say, since those lands are in a wildlife management area and aren't being managed to return cash to the trust fund, that the state should cash out the trust interest. That, you know, it changes the cash picture, at least for the school trust. I don't think it changes anything from the standpoint of me as a bird hunter or whatever. The lands are there to hunt now, but it does address that fiduciary responsibility. I think that's the driver that would be there for that.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, just for some background too on the parcels that Kathy was mentioning. One of the things there was some of it was some very old growth cedar and some other old growth as well. That from an ecological standpoint, it didn't make sense to harvest it for timber. So for monetary, for revenue production for the account or for the trust fund, but from a longer term wildlife and ecological standpoint, it made sense to be in that economic. So that was part of the reason for those transfers themselves internally.
Representative Dietrich.
Thank you. Just to add another perspective on this, there are some states where the DNR actually reimburses the school trust fund for allowing them to use all their land for hunting and stuff as they stay in wildlife management areas. So the whole premise here is that the land that we own is supposed to be, or at least we're supposed to be making every attempt to generate revenue. And so other states have found other ways to do that besides just selling. And then I have a question on the sale of land. Refresh my memory. Does that go right into the permanent school fund when you sell land, or does that go into the management account? Or is there for wildlife areas?
Ms. Lewis. Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, for the sale of permanent school fund land, the sale costs are from the proceeds. You take out the sale cost, and the net proceeds go into the corpus of the permanent school fund. They do not go into the Forest Expense account. And that does not matter who was the administrator of the land. It's for all the sale of the school trust land.
Representative Dietrich, thank you, Madam Chair. So, Ms. Lewis, this is one area that I haven't spent enough time on. Do you think that is constitutional, that it's the net revenue versus the gross on a sale of land, given that the Constitution only allows for forestry costs?
Yes, Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, the provision to do it is by statute for having the proceeds. If you are asking the issue, is it constitutional, I would refer you to the Attorney General's advice memo that was provided to the legislature. At the time, they were looking at issues of setting up the minerals management account and looking at the issue of what is a reasonable cost to take out of the proceeds. But when I do say sale costs, what happens is for the public land sales, you have an appraisal, you have advertising costs, you have notice costs. What happens is those costs are paid for by the buyer, and so that's part of the sale cost. We're not charging our staff time directly to that sale cost for what's coming out of the revenue from that sale. And so it's the out-of-pocket direct expenses that we do for the sale. The buyer, in fact, is paying that back.
Representative Dietrich, do you follow?
Yes, I do. So how would we follow those costs and the expenses taken out of those? Where do we go to find those? That's just one thing that I haven't run across in all my stacks of paperwork that I go through on this issue.
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, in our biennial reports, we provide the details on the sale cost. We have all those spreadsheets if you want them to see the breakdown of cost versus proceeds, but we do report the net proceeds in our regular reports every time in those reports.
Is that the biennial report that you present to us?
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, is the biennial report that we provide every 2 years on the results of the revenue generation through the biennial.
So that is the report.
And it's online too.
Okay. And that brings me, is that report due soon?
Madam Chair, the biennium has closed, and so and the fiscal books are just recently closed. So yes, that's one of our to-do tasks that we now can work on our biennial report.
And how long will it take to get that, do you think?
We will take a bit of a time as we fit it into everything else we're doing. So
1 month, 2 months?
We would hope to have it ready by the end of the session, I would think. By the beginning of the session.
Okay, good. Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, Madam Chair, Ms. Luce, real quick, if you could, just to refresh my memory, when the land swaps are done with trust fund land versus other DNR lands, I'm sure there's some type of a formula that goes on, because you have, and I don't need to know the exact formula, but every piece of every parcel will have its own asset values for ecological or standing timber or lake shore or whatever it might be regarding that. So is there some formula that's used for that, figuring out the value of one parcel versus the other, or is it an acre to acre land swap, or negotiated, or?
Ms. Lewis. Madam Chair, Mr. Johnson, the valuation process is set out in statute, and it's an appraisal. There's a shortened appraisal process for low-value parcels, but it's not based on acre per acre, it's based on appraised value.
Any other questions on this section? I think we'll move to the next. Review of the total acreage producing revenue versus the non-revenue generation.
Madam Chair, again, my name is Dave Schuler, for the record. Last month I showed this slide, which raised some concerns from this committee on revenue producing versus non-revenue producing lands. And this information is in handout number 4. 60% of trust land is commercial forest land and clearly capable of producing timber revenue. The other 40% is not commercial forest, but revenue is produced on these lands, although in some cases not a lot. And let me kind of discuss this a little bit. Here's the 3 categories. Commercial forest, obviously, timber products. It's the most efficient land we have to manage. When you get into non-commercial forest, it's not as efficient. A lot of times because of access, it's hard for us to get to some of these areas, but there are some decorative forest products that are coming off of those lands. And we have a fair amount of potential for future biomass off of those lands. When you get into non-forest, although we don't manage them as forest lands, basically we do have some other revenue coming off of those. For example, gravel leases, agricultural leases, peat leases, and some can generate some considerable revenue. So that's basically the difference. If there's any other follow-up questions that I might have missed there.
Did any members have any questions on that? Representative Dietrich.
Yeah, just thank you, Madam Chair. Would you just refresh my memory again? How do the leases work? Do they go straight into revenue off of leases? Does that go straight into the fund, or does that go into the forestry expense account to deduct forestry expenses?
Yeah, but at this time, the lease expenses, or the lease revenue goes into the forest expense account for management costs to be subtracted from. However, we do not subtract lease costs from that revenue.
Thanks, Madam Chair. So in other words, still that revenue, when you talk about they have great potential for they do generate revenue, but they really don't sometimes. You know, then it goes into the sort of forestry expense account where the money sits in order to certify forestry costs. So the forestry costs can eat up the revenue from the leases.
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, that is correct, but you're looking at another $500,000 to work with there. So you're going to, our costs are pretty much going to be about the same that we're going to be managing forests with. And if you've got an extra $500,000, you got an extra $500,000 going into the permanent fund.
So, Madam Chair, just so that we know what we're managing and how much it costs to manage it, because you keep talking about the true cost of management, to be quite honest, that's what we're trying to get to also. So our leasing business subsidizes our forestry business.
Madam Chair, Representative Dietrich, you could say that.
Mr. Schuler, could you clarify for us the number of acres that are not producing revenue?
I know that's something, but I don't have it at the top of my. Thought I had that. Oh, here we go. Madam Chair, of the 2.4 million acres of trust land that's managed by the Division of Forestry, about 1.5 million of that is commercial forest land. So basically you're looking at about 1 million acres is non-commercial or non-forest.
I said non-producing though. So
that's really hard to say because we do produce, we do produce other revenues on those lands. And there's potential on all 1 million acres to produce revenue if you start looking at biomass and things where we haven't had the markets to pursue that at this point.
Mr. Krebs.
Madam Chair, I guess kind of to put this into a context. Revenue from the lands, whether it's timber revenue or whether it's gravel, peat, biomass, spruce tips off from a non-commercial forest, that's all revenue that goes in. I think when I think we're trying to separate out, this is coming from trees and this is other revenue. And that's really, you really can't look at it that way because you have all these acres that, a commercial acre will produce trees. A non-commercial acre, it may be peat, but it's still revenue consolidated coming across all the lands. When we look at this, we can say that these lands have no value, and it may be a low value, but there's still a revenue stream coming off many of them. I do have a question for Mr. Schuler. Dave, probably 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we got a listing of all the leases that DNR had. And they were a wide variety, a wide spectrum, from septic systems to all the way across the board. There were cabin leases. Is there a trend in DNR forestry to reduce the number of leases, to get out of that business, or are you still looking at leases as a viable method of providing some service and revenue?
Madam Chair, Mr. Krebs, we are trying to reduce the number of certain types of leases. For example, hunting cabin leases. They're very difficult to manage. They're a mess out there. A lot of them are more trouble than the revenue we get from them are worth. So we're trying to reduce those. Some of the other ones, gravel leases, we're actively pursuing increasing the number of gravel leases on trust land. So it depends on the type of lease.
Yeah, Madam Chair, just for those of you that haven't been at the table long term, the subcommittee I chair spent 2 years looking at revenue generation alternatives on these lands. There's information available and be happy to share that. I will tell you right now, though, that it's the revenue potential for things like charging for hunting on the lands and those kind are really, really modest amounts. And almost every one of them we looked at had some kind of an organized constituency that's going to stand up and say, you're not doing that to us. So we really need to look at whether it's worth the pain that we get into. But we don't need to reinvent those numbers because they're there. We look at a lot of
We could share that with the...
Look at other states and
Okay, appreciate that. Any other questions on this section? Okay. Okay, I'm looking at a 2010 report under school trust lands and revenue generation. They talk about approximately 51,000 acres that is not producing. Is that correct? Yes. Peatland essays. Somebody address that. Ms. Lewis, thank you.
Madam Chair, the Peatland estimates are created by statute, and the legislature enacted the law and created the number loss of wetlands. And there is a provision in law that recognized that the peatland estimates included school trust lands, it's 51,000 acres. And at times, the DNR has brought forth bonding proposals to the legislature to start condemnation of those interests. I remember one night I was walking back and forth between the Capitol and the State Office building as they were considering it had lost in caucus committee, we didn't get any funding for that. But it is an issue out there that does need to be addressed at some time.
I hate to almost say it, but is that something that legacy funds could possibly go toward?
Madam Chair, it's a policy decision for the legislature.
Just thought I'd ask.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Carroll.
I always have to protect my own interests here, and if we contemplate buying out the interest of the school trust, there's also a tax forfeited trust interest in the Peatland SME, so.
Okay. I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you very much. Now we're going to move to an update on the operational order from the DNR. Thank you. Go ahead.
Hey, Madam Chair, my name is Mary McConnell, I'm Assistant Commissioner at the DNR. Madam Chair and committee members, we asked for an update on the op order, and as you may recall, we did a pretty detailed review of the op order at the August meeting. The commissioners decided that we really need to have a more clear direction to the agency about how we operate and manage trust fund lands. And so, in general, the purpose is to set for that clear priority with the agency, within the agency, that the lands are to be managed to maximize long-term economic return. We also want to clarify with the application of that language that is consistent with natural resources management principles, clarify that for our staff so that there's less confusion about what that language actually means. We want to make sure that we have the op order that directs us to really manage the trust lands more like a business. So we're going to institutionalize some business practices that we hopefully will help us do that. And then lastly, the other priority is to make sure that we have a management structure that actually ensures accountability and greater transparency and oversight. So those are the main purposes for the op order. It is at the final stages of review within the agency. We hope to have it completed by calendar year end. At this point in time, we have a couple of last meetings to go through it with senior leadership and sort of an internal interdisciplinary review process in early December, and then hope to bring it to you guys either or the committee in middle of December, depending if that's when your meeting is, or at the January meeting. The other thing that you'll have in your materials, because one of the things that we are going to do as part of the op order is, and to really get a management structure that better manages these lands, is we are going to put a new position in place, which is going to be a school trust administrative position. And Representative Dietrich, at our meeting in August, you asked for us to put a position description together so you could better see what that does, so that this is a meaningful position and not just another position that isn't adding value, so to speak. So in your materials is a one-page summary. We actually have, I think, a 7-page position description, but what we wanted to do is just give you a quick highlight of what the position is going to look like. And again, it's going to be very clear in the position description that the employee will act to represent the interests of the trust and make recommendations to the commissioner on all aspects of trust land management. To get at the issue of managing this more like a business, we are going to make sure that there's a business plan and also a top-to-bottom review of all of the lands to make sure we're doing things as efficiently as possible. And then lastly, I think also Representative Dietrich, you had wanted to make sure that this position actually had decision-making responsibilities, and we've seen in that last bullet that it's very clear in the position description that this employee will have extensive business or decision-making authority, and they'll oversee all of the divisions, forestry division and our minerals division, making sure that they're managing this correctly. And this position actually will report directly to the Commissioner's office, which we've never had in the agency before.
Mr. Connell, I was really disappointed this week when I got an email forward of an article from the Princeton newspaper, which is in everybody's packet, announcing DNR to hire a school trust fund manager. And I was really maybe dismayed that nobody had even mentioned this to the advisory committee, myself or anybody else, since we've been asking for this information for quite a while. And I guess I thought it was all a slap in the face that I read it in the paper. So I just wanted to make that known. I have some other questions too. Who this person's going to report to the commissioner? Is that person reporting to us, or the commissioner going to report to us on what's happening?
Madam Chair, committee members, the person is going to come report to the commissioner's office, to an assistant commissioner, and make recommendations to the commissioner on all aspects of trust land management and make recommendations to this committee in the same way.
I'm wondering who represents the kids.
This person is going to, Madam Chair, the 50 is going to represent the interest of the, it's very clear in the job description, they represent the interest of the trust.
Any questions? Representative Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So can you explain right now, so we're adding a new management layer between the assistant commissioner and the folks who are actually, the divisional folks who are doing the work on the ground. Who currently reports to the assistant commissioner for school trust land matters?
Madam Chair, committee members, there is no person that directly reports to the commissioner's office unless the division directors report to the commissioner's office, and they have staff within the divisions that do trust fund work.
Representative Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And so then those division managers will report to this new manager?
Their work will be overseen by this new manager, at least the trust aspects of it. Madam Chair, committee members, what we've observed is that there are a lot of people in the agency that have pieces of trust fund management work, but there's no one person whose job it is to oversee it on a daily level. That's just their job. Other people have pieces of it and are pulled in other directions, but it doesn't get the kind of focus that we believe it needs, and we don't think that we're going to drive the ball as fast as we need to without a person whose job it is to represent the interests of the trust and have it their day-to-day job every day. And just one other point, and I'm sorry that this is a surprise to you that in the newspaper, but this is the position that we talked about in August. That's part of the op order. It's not a different position. It's this position that I just talked about and the position description I just talked about.
Yes, but I've been asking for updates on this. In fact, on our October 26th meeting, I specifically asked about what was happening, and nothing was happening. I mean, nothing was concrete to bring forward. So, I mean, we've been asking about this, and I would think that it would have been diplomatic of you, maybe. I'm trying to be nice. It would have been prudent of you to at least have told somebody on the committee that this was getting to this stage before we have to read it in the paper. The other thing in this article that I found very disappointing was that they used a quote that Representative Dietrich had said about the PCFAC itself has been lax in its oversight duties over one 10-year period, meeting only 11 times. And I think that using that, somebody gave them that information. And I think it was inappropriate to do that when we have really been trying hard this year to be a true advisory committee. And I just thought that this was a slap in the face to us to have this kind of stuff written and to not be notified. So,
Madam Chair, can I continue on a couple of questions?
Representative Downing.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So having done some projects in state agencies in the past, have a little bit of a sense for the communication and the level of availability of a commissioner or an assistant commissioner. And I'm looking at this job description and the way you've got this structured. And sorry, I'm going to be a little critical here, but I mean, basically we're just adding another bureaucratic management position to fit into a chain of command, frankly, to make that chain of command even further dispersed from the true executive leadership level of the commissioner, who often delegates some authority to assistant commissioners in decision making there. So all we've done is add another layer of reporting in management and politics and all of that. And I just read the description of the job responsibilities, and if I could just maybe read these briefly for the committee, so we're on the record here. So this person will act as a liaison. They will represent and make recommendations. They'll monitor and guide regional and disciplinary work. They'll examine financial records. They'll develop a business plan. They'll ensure efficiency. They'll provide assistance and information to legislators. They'll conduct training workshops, submit periodic status reports, oversee management of trust lands by other agency divisions, and have extensive decision-making authority on program design and implementation. Now, I read all that, and all we did was just add another bureaucratic layer to a function that frankly just isn't working. And I don't know about anybody else, but I started reading this thing thinking, oh my gosh, we might actually have somebody who's focused on the financial return on investment, and not a word in this job description about the fundamental concern that we have as an advisory committee. And so I've always been in favor of implementing a separate function that would really have a return on investment approach to these lands. And I've been patient and listened carefully and tried to understand the DNR perspective. And I think, all the testimony that we've heard here over these many months just shows how difficult it is, I think, for your organization to manage this complex of lands to its intended ends. And again, no offense, but we have a cross purpose with these set of lands to a bureaucratic agency that has a broader conservation environmental mission to it. And I don't know who this person is that you're going to hire, but I look at just the basic structure of it. It seems to me it's designed to fail, to create more red tape. We got just another layer of bureaucracy and reporting and communication to go through. We're sitting here, I've been on this commission now for 6 months or however long it's been, and it's still not clear to me how all this stuff works or whether we got the right ratios and all of that. And there'll be another commission in 2 years and they'll have to go through the same learning process. And I mean, this thing is just structured wrong. And so I think I'm willing to listen and learn more about how the DNR manages these things and has a plan. But I think really my own personal effort now is going to be much more focused on the legislation that Representative Dietrich offered last session, and that's to find a way to build a new organization that's really going to be accountable to the kids in the legislature and not to administrative bureaucratic processes and political games like we've seen played here with the behind the curtain definition and decision to go ahead with this position. So I think this operational order and the hiring of this, or the plan to hire this person, kind of seals the deal for me. I just don't think we have a future with the DNR managing this program for us.
Anybody else? Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and with the intent of listening and learning more, I want to just point out a couple of things, because I feel like you have been pretty responsive to what we've said in the past. Point out a couple of things why I do think that this is, I don't want to say a recipe for failure, but just more of what we're already doing instead of actually doing things different to a different end. The first would be is that it is this person's role to set the goals and strategy, and I think most of the time we all need somebody to hold us hold us accountable, especially when it is making decisions on such a vast array of type of lands, everything from mineral to forestry and everything in between. It is really hard to be an expert on each one of those and on each plot of land. So in the legislation that I have brought forward, I have always included a board of directors who oversees this person, who helps them come to determine some goals, and then their job performance is based on achieving those goals. That board of directors has expertise in real estate, education, minerals, forestry, somewhat like this advisory committee. So I think that that as soon as some people are gone or this group becomes what they used to be, I think that this person could easily just end up being another DNR employee without somebody holding them accountable. The other thing is that when I wrote my legislation for an independent administrator, I used words like undivided, this person would have undivided loyalty, they have fiduciary responsibilities, and I know some people really balked at putting that in statute, but on the other hand, those are the primary functions of a trustee. And so I don't want to, we have been able to refocus some of the interest back onto that undivided loyalty and fiduciary responsibilities with the help of the DNR. They use that same language. But it's getting the results that are difficult for an agency that is set up the way that it is. So, with that being said, I don't want that interest to ever go away. I want something systemic that makes sure that 100 years from now, we still have people who are still using those words and always saying, the litmus test is the undivided loyalty to the beneficiaries. In other words, the school districts of this state. The other thing that makes me wonder here, and I should know because I wrote the legislation, in 2008 when we passed that bill, I think that we said that it was the exact language that we said the commissioner is the trustee. And I guess I shouldn't even say that because I don't know if that was exactly it. So if we have the commissioner who is truly the trustee, and then we have now this new position, I would have to say this person needs to be held accountable to the status of trustee. And many times people get really confused about who is trustee. The legislative auditor says anybody who is making major decisions on the trust is acting as a trustee. And to be quite honest, if we're unclear about that, we're not doing anybody any favors because they can be held to legal ramifications if they're not acting on behalf of the trust. And so I would hate to ever get to that point in our state, so I don't want to start ignoring that label and that definition so that somebody can at least know what they are into and what the kind of responsibilities that it does entail. So those would be my comments on that description so far. Madam Chair, thank you.
Ms. McConnell, what are they talking about for salary benefit package or the costs, and is there support staff with this person? And is there a cost-benefit analysis going to be done, whether it pays off?
Madam Chair, committee members, we want somebody that's very talented and somebody that can be influential and manage people within the agency at the highest levels because they're going to be overseeing division directors. So this is not going to be a beginning level salary person. My sense is it's going to be probably in that $60,000 to $70,000 range. We don't have a system set up to do a return on investment for that position, but I've been in the agency now since February, and I don't think that we're going to drive the ball on trust fund management without a position like this. It's just not going to happen, given how many people have pieces within the agency. I think there needs to be accountability with one person, and I firmly believe it. And I think that overall that we will see costs go down and management improve.
So the 60 or 70,000 probably doesn't include benefits.
That would not.
So what are we talking about?
Well, generally we look at about 100,000 per employee.
Okay.
On average.
Representative Downey?
Madam Chair, I just was listening to the comments, and again, nowhere in this job description is there anything about holding this person accountable to costs going down and I don't know, whatever other things you said, results improving. And I don't mean to be overly critical here, but this is a classic bureaucratic impulse response to a problem, which is to add another layer into the chain of command. Somebody who frankly is going to have almost zero ultimate decision-making authority, 2 levels removed from a commissioner. You folks worked in a state agency, right? Some of you? I mean, come on, a $60,000 to $70,000 a year employee, overseeing divisional managers who literally have hundreds of people reporting to them and very complex programs and unbelievably sophisticated and complex accounting systems, and then the political dynamics of a commissioner and the assistant commissioners and all of the issues swirling around this thing. And we think that this position, a mid-level manager position in the DNR, is the solution to the school trust funds problem. I mean, this is an insult. It's an insult to our chair, and it's an insult to our advisory committee. I mean, almost zero thought applied to the objectives that we have constantly been striving. I mean, Owen has been on this thing for 6 months. I can't imagine the folks who've been on here a couple of years. Anyway, this is an entirely inadequate response. It appears to me to be entirely politically driven, to hold some kind of a foil out there to say, gee, we're dealing with this problem, and the DNR is the solution for the school trust funds going on. The way it's been handled appears to be very intentionally political, to make some points and to take this issue off the table. And the implementation, again, just shows zero creativity and zero interest in actually addressing the concerns that we have raised as a commission. So, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm speaking very strongly here publicly, but I think it needs to be said. This is absolutely not a solution. It is the absolute wrong response and will get us nowhere, and we'll have this exact same discussion with 10 different people at this commission 5 or 10 years from now, if this is the path we take. I just don't think it's an adequate response at all.
Did you want to respond?
Yes, Madam Chair, committee members. I purposely did not bring the entire job description today. We just did it at a very high level. And I think that if you had the full job description and you see the full report, you'll see it's a lot more thoughtful than your impression.
Can you forward that to me, and then I'll forward it to them?
And I can just, if you like, I can just talk about, we talk about some of these things at our August meeting, but for example, on the business side, I can talk to you about, we are going to employ some business best practices that actually have performance metrics. That actually, on a quarterly basis, we submit to the commissioner a quarterly business review, which is a standard practice in sort of the GE model, which will talk about forecasted annual revenue, actual revenue, market trends. So we are going to be running this more like a business review. And I don't have the detail in here which would answer some of your questions. But
we'll look forward to seeing that.
Yep.
Madam Chair, if this is my last comment, I'll be quiet for the rest of the meeting. I'm sorry, the presentation of the overview of the position that the Commissioner's office felt was important enough to bring before this commission today said absolutely nothing about performance metrics, outcomes, cost containment, none of that. And so then to say, well, gee, if you actually read the 8-page job description, boy, the stuff that you're really looking for is in there. Clearly, that's not important enough to make it to the executive summary. So, I mean, I'm sorry, some kind of new and improved financial reporting metric system, that would be fantastic. It would give people on this committee and people in the agency better information. But you can do that with the existing tools you've got. You don't need a new manager just to do that. The job description is pretty clear. This is all about somehow managing the relationship and having a front person to keep everything behind the curtain nice and tidy. And again, it's not what we need.
Mr. Johnson.
Madam Chair, thank you. Ms. McConnell, my first question was already answered, and that's just asking if we could get access to a full position description, since this is just an overview and a summary. The other thing, you mentioned that you really don't have the return on investment parameters all set up on this, or how it would be measured, but just could you give me a sense of your feelings or the discussion and how it's gone of how the overall savings may displace the the expense on this position with regards to the trust fund?
Yeah, Madam Chair, committee members, one of the things that's set out in the order is on the financial side, we found that there are very few people that can really easily understand how the flow of funds work and how monies flow and go and how costs are certified. It's a very, very complicated process. So we think that to manage things efficiently, you can't have a process that's as complicated as this is. So one of the things this person is going to be charged with doing is getting that simplified. We may need some legislative help to do that, but that will not only help, we believe, more efficiently manage for costs and revenue coming in, but it'll also be much more transparent, and we won't have to have these debates and discussions about how the flow of funds work. We have them over and over again. The other thing is that, like, again, as I said, we have a lot of different people with different pieces of the trust fund pie within the agency. I think that this position can consolidate some of those activities so that it's not so dispersed, and that will actually cut down on the number of people that actually have to touch the trust fund every day. That will help as well. We also are going to look at different revenue streams and basically look around the country to see what other people are doing. Representative Dietrich has done a lot of that, but we need to have continuous improvement within the agency and always be thinking about new ways to generate revenue, not just forestry, not just minerals. And a variety of other things that also within our agency, we know that sometimes there are lands that, because of the DNR restrictions that we've talked about here today, they prohibit or restrict the amount of revenue generating potential that those lands have. So we need to, as an agency, decide if those values are actually worth preserving on that land, that then we have to find a way to either sell or exchange those lands so that they can be income producing lands. We're also going to do a highest and best use analysis on all the trust fund lands to decide, are they best at forestry? Should they be sold? I mean, we talked here today about some of the forest lands probably shouldn't be forest lands. They could be sold. So there's never been a comprehensive highest and best use analysis done on all of the lands. We're going to, in some cases, the inventories are incomplete. So we need to complete our inventories so we understand what we have and what we don't have. So it's a lot of, you'll see a lot of detail in the op order about things that need to be done to start running this more like a business.
I have two questions. Which assistant commissioner would they be reporting to?
Like they're going to be.
Okay. The other thing is, some other states use creativity in how they use their land other than what we are currently using. In Texas, they have the land commissioner gave out geothermal leases on their coastal lands. I mean, there may be some other uses other than what we are currently thinking about. And so, do you think this person's going to be creative?
No one person can do all this. They're going to have to go out and look for it and look for creativity. I mean, I think Dave here talked about should we be doing more on the biomass side. That's why that's a big component of this job for continuous improvement in our revenue generation.
Okay, Ms. Phillips.
Madam Chair, Assistant Commissioner McConnell. The 5 years that I've been working on this, I haven't sensed that we're philosophically aligned. When I talk about we, I'm talking about the people that represent the children in the state of Minnesota with the DNR staff. And when I read this job description, I was concerned that the fiduciary responsibility seems to be missing. And granted, maybe it's back at the ranch. But I thought, who could fulfill this? Who could go in to an agency that's not philosophically aligned? I'm thinking Denise Dietrich on steroids couldn't be successful in this position. So we need a courageous zealot that could come in and turn around the agency and believe them with every bone in their body that the children of the state of Minnesota deserve to maximize this asset. And I've heard today keep in mind what the statute says. I counted 5 times I heard that said. We have not been keeping in mind what the statute says. And I just think I 100% agree. If we really want to do what's the best interest of the trust, I don't know that Jesus Christ could come in and do this.
Mr. Silva.
Madam Chair and Assistant Commissioner McConnell, members of this committee, Mr. Johnson and myself were able to hear the commissioner speak to the Chamber of Commerce and the Grand Rapids Area Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago. And when there was a question and answer session at the end, and I got to ask the question about specifics of maximizing proceeds into the school trust fund and looking at a different model. The question got turned totally around in his answer to, do you know how little goes into the school trust fund when it comes to the big picture of what it costs to educate children in the state of Minnesota? And I was so mad to have that response. This is from the top end, the commissioner, which means it's probably reflected through the whole agency. So I concur with Representative Downey's comments about the creating of another curtain. Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is just it seems to be a screen. And we need to do things differently when the philosophy at the top is that, you know, little this counts.
Senator Robin, on that issue, and we had this discussion a number of months ago, the fact is that it isn't a big percent. I mean, it's just the truth. But, you know, we're trying to make it matter, and we're trying to add to it. But what would happen if we would have to change the Constitution, is my understanding, to say that some of that revenue would not go into the corpus, but that it could actually be spent. How big do we want the corpus to get? And how little return are we receiving on it before we change strategies? That's what I keep thinking. Is there a point where tucking the money away and getting maybe billions of dollars in there is less important, and it's not motivational. It's not motivational because what comes out of it is not that significant in the big scheme of things. And so, I mean, should we be talking about doing something different? I realize it must take a constitutional amendment to do it, but is there a point that there would be the desire of the legislature to do something like that? Do we talk about it here? Do we think about presenting it to them? I don't know. Anybody? Mr. Price.
Madam Chair, over the period of time that I've participated on the committee, and certainly I think about as long as, you know, Representative Dietrich and, you know, Joe Silico and others, you know, we've had presentations on investments too. You know, this is a two-pronged issue that we've got here in front of us. One, we're talking about how do we maximize the amount of revenue coming in, you know, from the lands. But the other side we don't talk very much about, other than a presentation occasionally, is how do we manage the corpus of the trust through investments and that. And as I understand it, and, you know, I'm kind of like all of you, I kind of have to work around, and I have to be told 3 or 4 times before I fully understand. But I understand there are restrictions on investments, on how the money can be put out, and, you know, we're focusing on one part, and, you know, rightfully so. But we need to look at the other side of this picture as well, and see whether we can look at, from that standpoint, at maximizing that return on the investment to increase the contribution to the annual allocation to the students. You know, this is a bigger project than just one side of it. So,
Any other comments?
Mr. Nardi?
Yeah, Madam Chair, question for Commissioner McConnell. Did you give any thought to creating this position somewhere else in government? Like Department of Finance?
Madam Chair, committee members, we did not.
You know, as I've listened to the discussion, I find myself flip-flopping on how I feel about this. I don't think you're going to see the concerns about some independent oversight on this go away. I just don't see that happening. I think it's fair. I think it's reasonable. This document, the summary sheet we got, lists out, I think, tasks that are good things to be done internally and should be done internally, but it never gets us to any independent oversight. And Representative Downing asked the question, those of us that have been in agencies, as I think about someone in this position walking into one of those divisions to lay down the law on what's happening, that's going to be a tough job. I just don't see somebody making a real dent in it when they're accountable within the same agency structure. And that's why I asked the question I did. It just, somewhere here we need some independence from your management activities. Somebody who can be solely and totally focused on the responsibilities we have to the kids of the state. And so I think that is worth some consideration. Having said that, we're going to solve this problem here today, Madam Chair. And it seems to me we've got some pretty significant pieces on the table that require the attention of this group. We just did something with the BWCA exchange. There's a lot of work to be done on that. This is clearly an issue that's brought out passions in people. And I love it because this is the first time in decades that we've had this kind of attention focused on the management of these lands. There are probably some in the room that are wishing there wasn't quite as much attention focused on it right now, but I'm thinking that we ought to be a little systematic about how we approach this. We ought to look at the opportunities and the challenges for this group and then pick off 3 of them or 4 of them and figure out how to allocate our time over the next 12 months to try to drive those to some kind of conclusion. Rather than have us keep dragging DNR in here to give reports that many times we've heard the report before, frankly. So I'm thinking that at one of the future meetings we ought to spend some time really doing that, saying, okay, what are the members' concerns here? How do they shake out into some categories, and then put some priorities on them on how we proceed. I think it'll help us, and I would hope it would help the agency anticipate and plan for the work they put into responding to all the stuff we throw at them. So I don't know. I'll just put that out.
Great idea. I'm thinking at our next meeting we'll probably be talking about legislative priorities for next year, pending legislation and possible legislation, and that may help put it all together. Starting that conversation. Mr. Krebs.
Madam Chair, a suggestion in spinning off Mr. Nardi. Do we really have a good idea of all the statutory restrictions and guidance that we give to DNR and to the Department of Finance as it pertains to the school trust fund and the trust lands?
I'm not sure about that. Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. At one point, we do have a handout, I think, that references all school trust lands. But the problem is that for so long, they have intermingled state lands and school trust lands, so people interpret them as the same. But obviously, the Department of Finance is there. The amount of statutes and legislation that deals with public lands and special interests and this piece of land, that piece of land, and then the lands in general is just overwhelming. And it does get frustrating though, because the minute you think that you're on some level of okay, this is a little tweak we can make that would definitely, benefit. Oh, but in statute in, 1989, they said that you can only do this on riparian land or whatever. So, but somewhere, and I think Mr. Nardine is looking for, we should have a document that, where we referenced all, either state lands or, no, it was just wherever there was a statutory reference to school trust lands. And while people are looking for that, I will just comment on a couple of other things. Senator, how much money is in the fund and how much do we want to get there? Right now, there is $673 million in it. And let me just give you an example of the state of Texas. And I'm not comparing directly, people. I am really I only one know how to learn is to look at what other people do well. The state of Texas has, I think their fund is like $23 billion. And they actually, this past year, wanted to take some of the corpus of the fund to fund education. And they needed a constitutional amendment for that. And it passed. But what happened is at the last minute of the constitutional amendment, some opponents got more momentum, and so it only passed like 53%, or something like that. So there's an article, and I gave it to the chair and asked her to copy it for this group about the Texas scenario. So that will give you just a little bit of history or what other people are doing. And then to the other point of Mr. Nardane, that this person possibly housed in the Department of Finance, many people have told that to me also. And so I really don't like going back in history much, but because I like to look forward. And I'm not saying that this can't work, but all I can say is in the Legislative Auditor's Report of 1998, that was one of their suggestions that we definitely needed somebody to be outside of the DNR to help make decisions on this land, on our land. One of their suggestions was that the Commission of Finance get involved, and I don't even know exactly what the words were anymore. And so, of course, the Commissioner of the Department of Finance immediately wrote a letter and said, well, we support the increased role of the Department of Finance, but we have real concerns about moving over here, because then the expectations of them would really be raised. And they're not qualified to make the decisions. You need somebody who understands lands and different types of land types. And that is why I keep coming back to, you can either hire one person and say, okay, but that person cannot do all of this. So you can also have a board of directors who is accountable to that person, or that person is accountable to a board. So I just wanted to make those 2 points, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Any other comments on this issue? Thank you very much. Okay. Other business. We had some other issues that were on the agenda, questions that people have brought forward, and I want to make sure we address them. One of them is Mr. Krebs had asked for an overview and background of the process of why Statute 1680.125 was enacted. We have that request into the Legislative Reference Library, so as soon as we get that information, we'll make sure everybody gets it. Let's see. We don't have that on here. We didn't put that on here. We were going to be talking about pending and future legislation, and I did send out an email on October 31st to all legislators, the DNR, and the committee members here, requesting if anybody had any pending or potential legislation that they should bring it forward, even if it was at the concept level. I do have a list of the pending from last session, and we're working on some other things, but I have not received that from the DNR, so if they have at least some concepts of things that they're going to do, it would be nice for our next meeting to have that so that we can discuss it. Let's see. Also, Representative Dietrich had requested the DNR to put out a timely press release to all stakeholders and public regarding the Boundary Waters fire, explaining the damage to the school trust land inside and outside of the Boundary Waters canoe area. To date, I've not seen any press release. Does the DNR want to comment on that?
For the record, again, my name's Dave Schuler with the Department of Natural Resources. I was hoping Bob Meyer hadn't stepped out just yet. He was supposed to comment on this, but the press release has not come out yet. But the message I was given is that someone from our Office of Communications and Outreach would contact either the chair or Representative Dietrich and work through something like that. If that's the request that
It was requested a month ago, so hopefully we can see it by the end of this year. I hate to be short, but
okay.
I'm a bit frustrated. So thank you.
Thank you.
Madam Chair,
yes.
at the end of this year, pretty soon it's not going to be newsworthy.
Well, it isn't. That's why I said it sarcastically.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay. Then I wanted to talk about meeting dates as we move forward. I think we have some work to do soon, and I think we should do it while it's fresh. So I'm suggesting, I don't want to go into the holidays, so I'm suggesting December 9th on a Friday to have our next meeting, so that we can have the proposals or concepts for legislation, so that we can have a good discussion about what we as an advisory committee can support. I want to be a true advisory committee, and so I think it's important that we have this discussion on December 9th, if that date works for most people, I hope.
What time of the day do you think?
I'm guessing 10. Does that work best for people or not?
I
Or do you
prefer to
like this-
people that are driving the long distance, whatever is comfortable for them works for me.
What works?
Here at 8:30.
Do you want to start 8:30 again?
I just gotta get up earlier.
You think 10 works better?
8:30 is awful early, I was late today. I should drive with you. 9.
How about
I should
9?
drive with you, Mom.
Would 9 o'clock work? Can we compromise at 9?
Sure.
Okay. So 9 at 9? On the 9th at 9 o'clock? And then I would suggest that we take a little break, and we don't start session until January 24th. So my suggestion would be that our next meeting would then after the December one would be January 27th, the first Friday the session starts. It would get us geared up for if we need to do any advocating for the positions that we decide on. So does that seem to be to everybody's approval? January 27th is Friday. So, with that, does anybody else have anything they wanted to bring forward to the committee? Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I apologize for going in and out with LCC and Margolin at the same time, but I was wondering, did we get an update from Ms. Lewis or someone from the DNR on the status of the land sale with the City of Gilbert, the school trust?
We didn't go to that specific, so maybe she could bring that forward now.
If we had time, Madam Chair, I wouldn't mind hearing where the DNR is at on that issue. I think it kind of sets a basis for some of the discussion that we could have next session.
Thank you, Ms. Lewis.
Madam Chair, members, the DNR has a public auction sale scheduled for December 7th. The sale includes 5 school trust parcels. 3 are in Cook County. One is a very small parcel. It's an island by the city of Bull Road, often flooded with water. The last one, in which Representative McNamara is talking about, is St. Mary's Lake parcel. It's 3 miles south of Evelyn, next to the airport. And the minimum bid price is $655,785. The sale also includes 2 university trust parcels and acquired parcels. Public auction sale December 7th.
Representative McNamara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Lewis, is this in the scale of school trust land sale? You mentioned the number of different parcels. How does that equate to previous year's sales?
Madam Chair, Representative McNamara, we typically have the school trust parcels in the fall. We usually are holding 2 sales a year. Last year we had about 20 parcels for sale total, with majority of them schools, so there's a few less. One of the things is it's not a good market for land sales, as everybody knows. So what you want to do is look at particularly parcels that are saleable. Sometimes we have some that are very borderline and in a tough market. It's hard to put up ones that are borderline and having success too.
Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lewis, what was the net or gross amount raised in the sale of 20 parcels last year?
Madam Chair, that is in our reports, but I didn't have it immediately handy. I can certainly provide it to the committee later, but it's also found in our reports that are online.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Lewis, were any of them in excess of $1 million, or was the gross total sales in excess of, was it in the millions?
Madam Chair, Representative McNamara, no.
Okay, and thank you, Madam Chair, thank you for the flexibility. Ms. Lewis, what about the sale that you talked about, a minimum bid at the airport? Is that, have we done sales that large in recent history of school trust land?
Madam Chair, Representative McNamara, we have had parcels of that size since I've been working on the lands program the last 11 years. So, yes, we have had parcels of that size, and we have acquired parcels that are multi-million dollars that we've had in percentages.
Representative.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Ms. Lewis, the minimum bid of the 600,000 plus number you mentioned, is that based on an appraisal, and when was that appraisal done?
Madam Chair, Representative McNamara, yes, it's based on appraisal plus some sale cost, and the appraisal was done this summer, so it was done in recent times. So it's looking at the current market.
Just a final comment, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Lewis, for being smart enough to do a current appraisal and not come before here and say it was a 2008 appraisal. I appreciate your honesty in that. That's an important, I did not know that, and that's important if we're going to sell this. You made the point to say the market might not be the same that it was a few years ago, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be looking at the possibility of what can happen to put this property back on the tax rolls. We're never going to get forest land out of it. It's next to an airport, I'd imagine. We can't plant trees on it, but it is, if I remember right, accessible to city sewer and water, and could be developable lots. And so thank you for going forward. I think it leads to the point that we do need to look at not only managing this land for forest or minerals or the recreation, and that's where, Madam Chair, just if I could real quickly, we did get in our handouts a thing that's called the 2011 legislative proposal, and I'll bring members down to the second to the bottom bullet point, was an issue that we had in our House File 1010, which is the original Environment Finance Bill, and we had a discussion on the House floor. Representative Dietrich and I had some discussion back and forth about in current law, and it's important, folks, we talk about wanting to change this and manage this land for the maximum benefit of the kids, but it's important in current statute, it tells us that we can do that, but we have to take into account the sound natural resources conservation management principles and other specific policies provided in state law. It's actually duplicative, almost word for word, maybe with the exception of one word from a statute or chapter, a couple of chapters or pages above it. But unfortunately, that being in there again gives reason for some people in the agency and some advocates, I believe, to say that, you know what, we actually have an obligation to manage this land for the deer hunters, not necessarily for the school kids. And I think it's important by having this in twice. I Representative Dietrich, I thought more about this. I think we would have been right to remove this. It's once already. By having it in there twice, I think that it just uses and gives people an opportunity to say, well, we should be managing this. And if we're going to manage it for things other than for the kids, we should pay for it. And hopefully the DNR will come up now with some proposals to maybe turn some of this land over. I think it was Mr. Nargain mentioned there's a parcel that's in the middle of a WMA. I'm sorry, the DNR should come up with a proposal to start to turn some of those into WMAs and switch some of them over. I mean, it's not going to be very expensive land. My guess is it's relatively inexpensive land. And WMAs can be logged already, so it could still be logged. It's not a state park, so it would you know, I think those are some of the things, but Ms. Lewis, I'm glad you're moving forward on some of these issues as we have the bigger discussion about who's gonna manage it, where, and, how, but I think we need to have that.
Hey, Ms. Lewis, I'm just wondering, if we were to get the minimum bid, I don't want to assume anything, would this money then go into the corpus?
Madam Chair, the sales costs go back to the funds which pay the cost, and most of this is to go to the corpus of the Private School Fund.
And approximately how much would that be, Ethan, if it got the minimum?
It's probably about $650,000, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, appreciate that. Mr. Nardi?
City Manager, I just wanted to thank you for changing the location of the meeting. I found that the audio system in here helps, and are we taping this?
We were going to videotape, we weren't able to, but we do have an audio tape.
Okay, because there, as interest peaks on what we're doing, I think we've got others that might want to monitor by checking the transcripts on it rather than having to travel here all the time. So I just congratulate you on changing the venue for the meeting. So.
Thank you. Well, if there's nothing else, I will, I'm sorry, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. Just a couple quick comments. First of all, I'd just like to thank everybody for all the passion and the questions and the dialogue that's been happening, because I really think it all does lead to dialogue that's going to add to great things, beneficial changes. I'd also like to thank all the DNR personnel, the presenters that came in. You guys have an unenviable job. You take some interrogations from us pretty well, and thank you for your professionalism and the good data you're giving us. And then there was just something I'm just going to throw it out for the record so that others can think about it. But you know, we keep thinking about different ways and trying to think out of the box, and this has been rattling around in my head for a while, and finally I thought, well, why not? But is there, I don't know what the answer is, but I keep wondering if there's any legal restriction to individual contributions to the trust fund, and I don't think there are. But that's one thing that's never been asked for. The public has never been asked to contribute, and bequests are could be another really interesting tool for this fund. So that's something for future thought.
Thank you, great idea. And again, I do also want to thank the DNR for all the information that they're supplying. We're not out to get you. We just want facts so that we can make educated decisions on behalf of the children of the state. So if there aren't any other questions, the meeting is adjourned.
Had a little project going.
Can you run? Yeah. So.
I set up an event and it's Christmas. And it's how to buy local. Did you get a printed?